The rain had been falling for hours, quiet but steady, wrapping the small coastal town of Ashford Bay in a blanket of mist. Inside a cozy but dimly lit house near the edge of the street, Emily Parker sat alone on her couch, a thin blanket around her shoulders. The clock ticked softly on the wall, the only sound breaking through the stillness. Her cup of tea had gone cold, untouched for an hour. While her thoughts drifted to places she didn't want to revisit, it had been 3 years since her divorce, yet the emptiness still lingered. Her ex-husband Daniel had moved on, easily remarried, built a new life. But Emily stayed behind, holding on to memories she couldn't quite let go of. The house that was once filled with laughter and conversation now felt like an echo chamber. The silence was deafening, and the rain only made it worse. She tried to distract herself, flipping through a book she'd read a dozen times, but her mind wouldn't stay still. It wandered to the day Daniel left, the way he had said, "We just grew apart." As if love were something that could quietly slip away without warning. She had spent years trying to fix what was already broken, and when it ended, she told herself she was fine. But tonight, sitting there in the flickering light, she felt the truth: she was lonely. A soft rumble of thunder rolled through the night sky. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. Emily sighed, whispering to herself, "Of course." She got up, searching through the drawer for candles. The room filled with a faint glow as she lit them, each small flame pushing back the shadows that crept in. The gentle crackle of the rain against the window mixed with the whisper of the wind outside. As she sat down again, wrapping her blanket tighter, there came a sound that made her freeze. A knock, not loud. Just a soft, hesitant tap. She frowned, unsure if she had imagined it. No one visited her, especially not at this hour. She waited, listening. Then it came again, a little firmer this time. She stood slowly, her heart beating faster. The power was still out, and the rain made it hard to see through the front window. She hesitated at the door, her hand hovering over the handle. "Who is it?" she called out. There was a pause. Then a voice, low, familiar: "Emily, it's Ethan." Her heart skipped. Ethan Cole. She hadn't heard that voice in years. He had been Daniel's closest friend, once and hers too, in a quiet, unspoken way. Back then, he'd been around often, always kind, always steady. But after the divorce, he'd disappeared. Like everyone else from that chapter of her life, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. There he was, standing in the rain, his jacket soaked, hair dripping, eyes tired but gentle. The years had changed. He looked older, little more worn, but his presence still carried the same calmness she remembered. "Ethan," she said softly, surprise and confusion mixing in her voice. He offered a small smile. "Hey, sorry to show up like this. My car broke down a few blocks away and my phone died. I remembered you lived nearby." For a moment, she just stood there, unsure what to say. The sight of him brought back so many memories: barbecues in the backyard, late night talks, his quiet jokes that always made her laugh even on the worst days. "Come in," she finally said, stepping aside. "You'll get sick out there." He hesitated, almost as if he didn't want to intrude, but then nodded and stepped inside. She handed him a towel and motioned toward the fireplace. "The power's out, but at least the fire's still warm." Ethan crouched near the flames, rubbing his hands together. "This feels good," he said with a sigh. Emily watched him, unsure how to act. It felt strange, familiar, yet foreign to have him here again. The silence between them was thick at first, filled only by the crackle of the fire. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't know you were back in town." He looked up at her. "Yeah, I moved back a few months ago. My dad's not well, so I'm helping out with the family hardware store." "I'm sorry to hear that," she said quietly. He nodded. "Thanks. It's been a tough year." Then, after a pause, he added, "You haven't changed much." She gave a small laugh. "You always did lie nicely." "Not lying," he said, smiling slightly. "You look strong. Different, but strong." His words hit her deeper than she expected. Strong. It had been a long time since anyone called her that. For a few minutes, they just sat there, letting the rain fill the silence. There was something comforting about the moment, something unspoken but real. Emily found herself studying him, the lines on his face, the way his eyes still carried that steady kindness. "You want something to eat?" she asked suddenly, needing to do something. Anything. He started to protest. "You don't have to. I want to," she said, cutting him off softly in the kitchen. She lit another candle and began pulling things from the fridge. Ethan followed, insisting on helping. Soon they were working side by side, making soup from whatever she had, left vegetables, noodles, a bit of broth. They moved easily together, laughing at small things, falling into an old rhythm neither had realized they'd missed. "It feels like old times," Ethan said, as he stirred the pot. She smiled faintly. "Except now we're not pretending everything's perfect." He looked at her then, really looked, and his voice softened. "Yeah, maybe it's better that way." When they finally sat down to eat, the candlelight flickered across their faces, and the storm outside began to quiet. The warmth of the soup, the soft glow, the familiar comfort, it all felt like a memory coming back to life. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her with a gentle expression. "I never meant to disappear, you know," he said quietly. "After the divorce, I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to make things harder." Emily nodded slowly, her throat tight. "I get it." Everyone drifted away. "I guess I stopped expecting people to stay." He hesitated, then said, "Maybe some people were just waiting for the right time to come back." The words hung between them, soft and uncertain. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the rain faded to a distant patter, and the candlelight flickered gently between them. Emily felt something stir inside her, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was something deeper. When Ethan smiled again, it wasn't forced. It was quiet, real, familiar. And as she looked back at him, Emily realized that the night didn't feel so lonely anymore. The gentle knock that had startled her hours ago had opened more than just her door, had opened her heart. Just a little, outside. The storm slowly drifted away, but inside, something new had begun, something that neither of them could yet name. Morning came softly, with pale sunlight spilling through the curtains. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm. Emily woke to the faint smell of coffee and the low sound of someone moving around in her kitchen. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then she remembered Ethan, the knock, the storm, the unexpected warmth of having someone there again. She sat up, her blanket slipping off her shoulders, and took a deep breath. It had been years since anyone else had been in this house. The thought made her both nervous and strangely comforted. She got up, brushed her hair back, and walked to the kitchen. Ethan stood by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. His jacket was draped over a chair, and his sleeves were rolled up. He looked comfortable, like he belonged there. When he turned and saw her, he smiled that familiar, easy smile. "Morning. I've found your coffee. Hope you don't mind." She shook her head. "Not at all. I'm just surprised you're still here." He handed her a mug. "I figured I'd wait for daylight before calling for help. Didn't want to leave you in the dark last night." Emily smiled faintly, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "You always were the responsible one." He laughed softly. "And you always underestimate how stubborn I can be." They sat down by the window, sipping their coffee as the sun climbed higher. The world outside glistened with dew, and the air smelled fresh, washed clean by the storm. It should have been an ordinary morning, but something about it felt different, alive, almost hopeful. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You look peaceful," he said. "I didn't think I'd ever see that again." She looked down, tracing her finger along the mug's edge. "I think I just forgot what peace felt like." He didn't respond right away, but his eyes said enough. There was something gentle in the way he looked at her, not pity, but understanding. After breakfast, Ethan called a mechanic to tow his car. It would take a few hours, so he offered to help around the house. Emily tried to refuse, but he insisted. Soon they were side by side again, fixing a loose curtain rod, trimming the plants on her porch, replacing a flickering bulb. They laughed at small things, teasing each other about their lack of handyman skills. For Emily, it felt strange but good. She hadn't laughed like this in years. Every shared glance, every quiet pause carried an old, unspoken warmth. Around noon, Ethan stood by the living room window, looking out at the clearing sky. "This house suits you," he said. "It's calm. Feels like you." She smiled softly. "Sometimes it feels too calm." He turned to her, his voice gentle. "Lonely calm." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." Ethan's expression softened, and for a moment he didn't speak. He just looked at her, and something in that look made her chest tighten. It was like he could see through the calm she'd built, the quiet walls she'd kept around her heart. "Emily," he said quietly, "you don't have to keep pretending you're fine. It's okay to miss people, to wish things had gone differently." She looked at him, caught off guard by the honesty in his tone. "You sound like someone who knows what that feels like." He smiled faintly. "I do." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, yes, but real. Ethan's phone buzzed on the table, breaking the moment. The mechanic had arrived. He stood, reaching for his jacket. "Guess that's my ride." She nodded, trying not to show the small ache that came with those words. "Thanks for staying last night, really?" He paused at the door. "I should be thanking you. You saved me from a miserable night in the rain." Then, with a half smile, he added, "Besides, I think I needed the company more than I realized." Before she could answer, he was gone. The house felt different after he left, quieter, but not in the same empty way. The echoes of his laughter, his voice, the warmth he'd brought, they lingered. Emily tried to go about her day, but her mind kept drifting back to him. His words replayed in her head. "You don't have to pretend you're fine." That evening, as the sun set over the bay, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the colors fade across the water. The phone rang. She picked it up, expecting a call from work, but froze when she heard his voice. "Hey, it's me," Ethan said. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." "Power back yet?" She smiled. "Yeah, everything's fine. That's good." There was a pause. "Listen, I was thinking, I never really got to say a proper goodbye earlier." "Goodbye?" She repeated, her heart skipping. "Yeah," he said, his tone lighter now. "But then I realized I don't want to say it." "Not yet." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You always had a dramatic side." "Ah, maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe I just don't want another 3 years to pass before I see you again." Her voice softened. "You won't." They talked for nearly an hour about work, life, old memories. The conversation flowed so naturally that Emily almost forgot the years of silence between them. When they finally hung up, she couldn't help but smile. Days passed, and their calls became regular. Sometimes he'd stop by after work with groceries, claiming he had extra. Other times, he'd fix small things around the house or help her with errands. Each visit felt like a small step closer to something neither of them dared to name. One Saturday, they drove to the farmer's market together. The town was busy, full of laughter and music. Emily caught herself smiling more than she had in a long time. Ethan walked beside her, occasionally making small jokes that made her laugh out loud at one point. He stopped at a flower stall, picking up a single white daisy. "This one suits you," he said, handing it to her. She raised an eyebrow. "Because it's simple." "Because it's real," he replied, his gaze steady. Her cheeks warmed. She looked away, unsure how to respond. But something inside her shifted that day. For the first time in years, she felt light, alive that evening. When they returned to her house, the sky turned gray again, hinting at another storm. They stood by the porch, listening to the wind pick up. "Seems like the weather likes us," Ethan joked. "Or it's trying to tell us something," Emily said with a small smile. He turned toward her, his voice low. "Maybe it's telling us not to wait anymore." The words hung in the air, carried by the sound of the wind. Emily's heart raced, not from fear, but from the strange, quiet truth she felt behind his words. Before she could respond, thunder rumbled again in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Ethan stepped closer, his expression soft but sure. "Can I come in before the storm starts again?" She met his eyes, her heart steady this time. "You don't have to ask, Ethan. You're already home." As the rain poured once more, they stepped inside together, not as lost souls passing through a lonely night, but as two people finally finding their way back to something they both needed, and for the first time in years. The sound of the rain didn't feel lonely at all. The days after the storm brought calm skies and a rhythm Emily hadn't felt in years. Her mornings were brighter, her evenings quieter in a softer, sweeter way. Ethan started dropping by often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but that familiar grin that made her heart stir. What began as small visits turned into something she quietly looked forward to. He'd sit on her porch after work, both of them sipping tea, watching the sunset melt into the horizon. They talked about little things, his new projects, her favorite books, old memories that once belonged to a different life. The space between them slowly filled with unspoken care. One afternoon, Emily was rearranging the shelves in her living room when she found a framed photo. Her and her ex-husband, Mark, smiling beside Ethan at a barbecue years ago. The picture hit her with a rush of nostalgia and discomfort. Ethan had been there through it all, through her marriage, her struggles, her quiet breakdown after the divorce. She stared at the photo, realizing how much had changed. And how much had stayed the same. When Ethan arrived that evening, she showed him the picture. He looked at it, smiling faintly. "We look younger," he said. "More hopeful," she added quietly. He nodded, his voice soft. "You were happy then. You deserved to stay that way." She turned to him, unsure of what to say. "Things don't always stay the same." "No," he said, meeting her eyes, "but some things still find their way back." The air grew still between them, heavy with things neither of them dared to speak. For a second, Emily thought he might reach for her hand, but instead, he stood up and offered to make dinner later. As they sat at the table eating pasta he'd cooked, she found herself watching him more closely, the way he moved. How gentle he was, how his laughter filled the quiet corners of her house. It wasn't just comfort she felt around him anymore. It was something deeper, something she didn't want to name yet. That night after he left, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, listening to the soft wind outside. She realized she was scared, scared of what she was starting to feel. Scared that if she let herself fall again, she might lose the fragile piece she'd rebuilt. The next morning, she busied herself with chores, trying to shake the thoughts away. But by evening, when Ethan showed up again with takeout and a smile, her heart betrayed her resolve. They ate together, laughing over simple things. When she accidentally spilled a bit of sauce on her shirt, he handed her a napkin, his fingers brushing against hers for just a second. It was a small touch, innocent even, but it sent a quiet shiver through her. Ethan noticed. His eyes lingered on hers for a heartbeat longer than usual. Before he looked away, the silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged, alive, filled with the awareness of something they both felt but didn't yet admit. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the glow warming the room. "You know," Ethan said suddenly, "I used to think love was simple. You find the right person and everything falls into place." Emily smiled sadly. "And then life proves otherwise." "Exactly," he said. "But lately I'm starting to believe maybe love isn't supposed to be simple. Maybe it's supposed to find you when you've stopped looking." She looked at him, heart thudding quietly. "And has it found you?" He met her gaze, his voice low but sure. "I think it has." Her breath caught. For a long second, neither of them moved. The fire crackled softly between them. Before she could respond, her phone rang, breaking the spell. She hesitated before answering. It was Mark, her ex-husband. "Hey," his voice came through, hesitant. "I heard about the storm. Just wanted to check in." Emily's tone was polite but distant. "I'm fine. Everything's fine." They talked briefly. Nothing meaningful, just surface words. But Ethan could tell from her face that the conversation had stirred something deep and complicated. When she hung up, she avoided his eyes. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. Yeah, it's just strange hearing from him again. Ethan leaned back, watching her carefully. You don't owe him anything, Emily. Not your time, not your peace. I know, she said softly, but part of me still feels guilty. Like I failed something. You didn't fail, he said firmly. You just stopped fighting for someone who stopped standing beside you. She looked at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. There was a quiet protectiveness there that warmed her more than she wanted to admit. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, Emily stood and walked to the window. You know what's funny? She said. For years, I thought love was supposed to be loud, full of grand gestures and promises. But now I think it's the quiet things that matter. Ethan walked over, standing beside her. Like what? Like someone showing up when it rains. Someone who stays even when you tell them you're fine. Kay smiled, his voice soft. That's all I ever wanted to be. Their eyes met, and something inside her broke free, a wall she hadn't even realized she'd built. She didn't say anything, but the silence said enough. The next day, Emily decided to visit the local art fair. Ethan joined her, and the two spent hours walking through colorful stalls, tasting homemade pies, and watching street musicians perform. It felt light, natural, like the weight of the past had lifted for a while, but as they walked back to the car, Emily noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Mark, her chest tightened. He saw her too and walked over. Emily, he greeted with a small smile. Glancing between her and Ethan, didn't expect to see you here. Hi, Mark, she said, trying to keep her tone calm. It's been a while. Ethan stayed quiet but close, his presence steady. Mark gave a polite nod, then said, I was actually going to call you. I wanted to talk, maybe catch up. Emily hesitated. Before she could answer, Ethan gently said, maybe this isn't the best time. Mark's eyes narrowed slightly, then softened. Right? Of course. Well, you know where to find me. He walked away, leaving behind a quiet tension. Emily let out a slow breath. That was uncomfortable. Ethan looked at her, his voice calm. You handled it well, did I? She said with a small, tired laugh. Because it didn't feel like it. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You don't need to look back anymore. You're doing fine, better than fine. She looked up at him, her voice quiet but firm. You make it easier. That evening, they sat together on her porch again, watching the sky darken. The air was cool, the scent of rain lingering from a brief shower earlier. Ethan, she said after a while, do you ever think we were meant to find each other again? He looked at her, his eyes warm. I don't think we found each other again, Emily. I think we finally saw what was always there. She smiled, tears stinging her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace, not because her past had disappeared, but because her present finally felt real as the night deepened. They sat there in quiet understanding, their hearts steady, their fears fading with the sound of the crickets outside. Neither of them said the word love, but both knew it was there in every glance, every silence, every small moment they chose to share. And though neither of them knew what the future would bring, they both understood something simple and true. Sometimes love doesn't come crashing in with noise and chaos. Sometimes it arrives softly, like a knock on a lonely night, and never leaves again. The morning after the fair felt strangely calm. Emily sat by the kitchen window, sunlight spilling across the table, her coffee untouched. The encounter with Mark lingered in her mind, but it no longer stirred the same ache it once did. Instead, it felt like a chapter she had already finished reading. Still, something inside her knew she had to close it properly, not with bitterness, but with understanding. Ethan stopped by later that morning, holding a bag of fresh bagels. You didn't sleep much, he said gently, noticing the faint circles under her eyes. She smiled weakly. You can always tell. I've learned to read you, he said with a soft grin, handing her coffee. You're thinking about Mark. Emily nodded, looking out the window. I think I need to talk to him one last time. Not because I want to go back, but because I need to move forward. Ethan's expression was calm, though his eyes flickered with worry. Do what you need to do. I'll be here. His quiet support gave her courage. That afternoon, Emily drove across town to the small cafe where Mark had asked to meet. He was already there, sitting by the window, looking older somehow, not in years, but in spirit. "Emily," he said, standing as she approached. "Thanks for coming." She sat down, offering a polite nod. "It's been a long time, Mark." He sighed, looking at her with something close to regret. "Yeah, too long. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I wasn't kind to you. I thought success meant winning, but I forgot what really mattered." She listened quietly, her heart steady. "You don't have to apologize, Mark. We both made mistakes. We just grew apart." He nodded slowly. "I see that now. I guess I thought maybe, if things were different." His voice trailed off. Emily smiled sadly. "If things were different, we might have stayed unhappy longer." For the first time, Mark laughed, a tired, honest laugh. "You're right." They talked for a while, not about getting back together, but about letting go. When they finally stood to leave, Emily felt a surprising sense of peace. The past no longer felt like a shadow. It was just a memory, one she could finally set down as she walked outside. The autumn wind brushed against her face, and she realized how light she felt. For years, she had been waiting for closure. And now, without tears or anger, she finally had it. When she returned home, Ethan was waiting by the porch. Leaning against the railing, a quiet smile on his face. "How'd it go?" "It went the way it needed to," she said. "It's over. Really over." He nodded, his voice soft. "Good, you deserve that peace." She looked at him for a long moment, realizing just how much his presence had become part of her calm. "You waited for me," she said. "I told you I would." For a moment, they just stood there, the golden light of late afternoon falling over them. There was no grand confession, no dramatic music, just the warmth of two people who had already said everything through their actions. That evening, Ethan stayed for dinner. They cooked together, laughing over burnt toast and unevenly chopped vegetables. For Emily, it wasn't just about sharing a meal, it was about sharing her life again. One small step at a time. After they ate, they sat on the porch, the same spot where everything had begun. The crickets sang softly, and the moon hung low over the trees. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You know, I used to think I'd never belong anywhere," he said quietly. "But then I found this house, found you, and suddenly everything felt right." Emily's heart tightened. "You've always belonged, Ethan. Maybe it just took both of us a while to see it." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "So what happens now?" She smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep certainty. "Now we stop looking backward. We start living." For a while they sat in silence, just watching the night. The porch light flickered gently, the air smelled of pine and rain, and Emily realized she wasn't lonely anymore. The house that once echoed with silence now felt alive again, not because of noise, but because of connection. A few weeks later, life settled into a gentle rhythm. Ethan and Emily didn't rush into labels or promises. Their bond grew quietly, rooted in trust and kindness. Sometimes he'd stop by after work just to fix a leaky faucet or bring her flowers from the farmer's market. Other times they'd sit in comfortable silence, reading or listening to old records. One snowy evening in December, Emily found herself reflecting on how far she'd come. She stood by the window, watching flakes fall softly over the street, her heart full. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. She nodded. "It's the kind of beauty you only notice when you finally slow down." He looked at her with quiet admiration. "You've changed, Emily. You're lighter now." "I think I just stopped running from life," she said softly, "and started living it again." He smiled. "Then I'm lucky to be part of that life." She turned to face him, her eyes bright. "You're not just part of it, Ethan. You're the reason it feels like home again." The words hung between them, soft and certain. He didn't respond right away, but the warmth in his gaze said everything. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the world in quiet peace. Inside, the fire crackled gently, and the house, once lonely and cold, now felt filled with life, laughter, and love. Months later, Emily would often look back on that stormy night, the night everything changed, and smile. It had started with fear and isolation, but ended with something far more powerful. A second chance at love, found not in chaos, but in stillness. She realized love doesn't always come when you're ready or looking. Sometimes it arrives when you're at your lowest, with a gentle knock at the door and a quiet promise that you are not alone anymore. As spring returned, the world outside bloomed again, and so did Emily's life. She and Ethan tended the small garden in the backyard together, planting flowers and laughing over uneven rows. There was nothing perfect about it. The weeds still grew, the paint still chipped, but that was the beauty of it all. Life wasn't perfect. It was real. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Ethan took her hand. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. "Every now and then," she said with a smile. "It reminds me how fragile life can be and how strong we become when someone finally knocks and we choose to open the door." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm glad you did." She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me too." And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of summer and the fading light of day, Emily knew she had found what she'd been missing all along, not just love, but peace. The storm that once brought fear had also brought renewal. The knock that once startled her had led her to someone who saw her not as broken, but as whole. Love hadn't saved her. She had saved herself, and in doing so, made space for love to find her again. And that was how one lonely night, one gentle knock changed everything forever.